Tonight we examine one of America's most enigmatic literary figures, Edgar Allan Poe. More than just a writer of dark tales, Poe was a literary pioneer who helped shape three distinct genres and establish the foundation of American literary criticism. His story reveals how personal tragedy can transform into timeless art. Born in Boston on January 19, 1809, Edgar Poe entered a world of theatrical glamour and harsh realities. His mother, Elizabeth Arnold Poe, was one of America's most celebrated actresses, performing Shakespeare and contemporary dramas across the eastern seaboard. But tuberculosis, the great killer of the 19th century, claimed Elizabeth when Edgar was barely 3 years old. His father had already abandoned the family. This early encounter with death and abandonment would become the recurring themes of his greatest works. John Allan, a prosperous Richmond tobacco merchant, took Edgar into his household. Notice I say took in, not adopted. This legal and emotional limbo would haunt Poe throughout his life. Allan provided education at the finest schools, including the University of Virginia, yet withheld the security of true belonging and inheritance. To understand Poe's genius, we must also acknowledge his profound psychological struggles. Modern psychiatrists studying his letters and behaviour patterns suggest Poe likely suffered from what we now recognise as bipolar disorder. The 19th century had no understanding of mental illness. What Poe experienced as overwhelming mood swings, periods of manic creativity followed by crushing depression, were seen simply as character flaws or moral weakness. His foster father, John Allan, frequently berated him for his erratic behaviour and lack of discipline. At the University of Virginia, Poe excelled academically but struggled financially. Allan's refusal to provide adequate funds forced Poe to gamble and lose heavily. This pattern of financial instability would plague his entire career. But it was here that Poe began writing seriously. His first collection, Tamerlane and Other Poems, published in 1827 when he was just 18, already showed his fascination with death, beauty, and the supernatural. What many don't realise is that Poe essentially invented the modern detective story. In The Murders in the Rue Morgue, Dupin doesn't rely on witnesses or confessions. He observes physical evidence, analyses behavioural patterns, and applies logical reasoning. This methodology would later influence Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes and every detective story since. Poe followed this with The Mystery of Marie Roget in 1842 and The Purloined Letter in 1844. These three stories established every convention of detective fiction we know today: the brilliant detective, the loyal companion, the locked room mystery, and the solution through pure logic. In 1835, Poe married his 13-year-old cousin, Virginia Clem. While shocking by today's standards, such marriages were not uncommon in the 1830s, especially in the South. By all accounts, Edgar and Virginia shared a deep, devoted love. She inspired some of his most beautiful poetry and provided the emotional stability he desperately needed. Virginia was not just his wife, but his muse, his anchor in an increasingly turbulent world. But in 1842, while singing at their piano, Virginia began coughing blood. Tuberculosis, the same disease that claimed his mother, had found Virginia. For 5 agonizing years, Poe watched his beloved wife slowly waste away. It was during Virginia's illness that Poe created his most famous poem, The Raven. Published in 1845, it made him internationally famous overnight. But The Raven is more than a spooky poem about a talking bird. It's a masterpiece of technical craft. Poe deliberately chose the refrain, "nevermore," because it was the most melancholy word in the English language. The poem's structure is mathematical in its precision. 18 stanzas, each building psychological tension. The narrator's descent from curiosity to despair mirrors Poe's own experience watching Virginia's decline. His other great poems, Annabel Lee, Ulalume, The Bells, all explore themes of lost love and death. For over a century, Poe was dismissed as a hopeless alcoholic. This myth, largely spread by his literary executor Rufus Griswold, who despised Poe, has been thoroughly debunked by modern medical research. Dr. R. Michael Benitez studied Poe's symptoms and concluded he likely suffered from a rare genetic condition affecting alcohol metabolism. Friends consistently reported that Poe was actually a light drinker who became violently ill from small amounts of alcohol. Nancy Richmond wrote, "Edgar was the most temperate of men. A single glass of wine would make him ill for days." This medical condition, combined with his mental health struggles, created a perfect storm. While Poe's poems made him famous, his short stories revealed his true genius, the ability to explore the darkest corners of human psychology with scientific precision. The Telltale Heart, published in 1843, doesn't just tell us about a murder. It takes us inside the mind of madness itself. The Fall of the House of Usher goes beyond Gothic horror to explore themes of decay, isolation, and the connection between physical and mental deterioration. The house itself becomes a character, its fissures mirroring the psychological cracks in Roderick Usher's mind. And the Cask of Amontillado, perhaps the perfect revenge story ever written. In just a few pages, Poe creates a tale of calculated vengeance that has haunted readers for over 175 years. Modern neuroscience suggests that Poe's mental illness may have enhanced certain aspects of his creativity. The same brain patterns associated with bipolar disorder, intense focus, racing thoughts, heightened emotional sensitivity, can fuel extraordinary artistic output. During manic episodes, Poe could write with superhuman intensity. The Raven was reportedly composed in a single night of fevered creativity. What many don't realise is that Poe was also America's first major literary critic and theorist. His reviews in magazines like the Southern Literary Messenger helped establish standards for American literature. Poe believed that a poem should create a single, unified emotional effect. Poe's mental health was compounded by relentless financial pressure. In an era before copyright protection, publishers routinely pirated his work without payment. The Raven, which made him internationally famous, earned him exactly $14. He moved constantly. Richmond, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, always chasing editorial positions. Virginia often went without proper food or warm clothing, while Poe desperately sought paying work. His letters reveal a man on the edge of breakdown. Poe's mental struggles manifested in an almost pathological perfectionism. He would revise poems dozens of times, obsessing over single words, driving editors to distraction. This wasn't mere artistic temperament, it was compulsive behaviour that sabotaged his career. His correspondence reveals a man acutely aware of his own difficulties. To Maria Clem he wrote, "I am constitutionally sensitive, nervous to a very unusual degree. I became insane, with long intervals of horrible sanity." This self-awareness makes his struggles even more poignant. Virginia died in January 1847, and with her death, Poe's world collapsed. He attempted to rebuild his life, even becoming engaged to his childhood sweetheart, Elmira Royster Shelton. But on October 3, 1849, Poe was found in Baltimore, wearing clothes that weren't his own, in a delirious state. He died 4 days later at age 40, never regaining enough consciousness to explain what had happened. The mystery of his death has never been solved. Modern medical experts suggest everything from diabetes to brain tumour, from rabies to alcoholic cardiomyopathy. After Poe's death, Rufus Griswold published a vindictive obituary that painted him as a depraved alcoholic. This character assassination followed Poe for over a century. Only in recent decades have scholars worked to separate the man from the myth. Edgar Allan Poe died believing himself a failure. He earned less than $300 in his entire career, yet today his influence on world literature is immeasurable. He invented the detective story, perfected psychological horror, and created some of America's most beloved poems. Poe's life was a battle against poverty, against society's misunderstanding of mental illness, and against the demons in his own mind. What makes his achievement remarkable is that he created timeless art while struggling with conditions that would challenge anyone. Today we can read The Raven with new understanding. We're witnessing how a brilliant mind transformed personal anguish into universal art. Poe's story reminds us how far we've come in understanding mental health.